Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm waiting for my friend Kitty Layson. How are you, sister? I hope yesterday wasn't too much for you when I had to go after Nikki, Nicola, Nikita, and sneakers. Sorry guys, I'm cleaning it. I'm waiting for Lloyd to show up. Sorry, we're just waiting for the screen. I'm using my old computer. Boy, you should see the comment section. You should see the comment section, man. One thing I've done, I've put the comment section on review, meaning you can't get your comment to go through unless I review it, right? Because of the trolls, the demons that manifest. Boy, guys, if you should see the comments from Nicola, Nikita's fangirls. If this guy is not a cult leader, another cult leader who attracts sickos, mentally disturbed, mentally deranged, psychos, fangirls who are cultists, who follow him as a cult leader, I don't know what to tell you. Boy, you should see the comment section. They are livid and angry. Here's another group who now have me living in their head, not only rent free, but owning their brains. And have you seen Nicola? Have you seen little Nikita? Talk about an effeminate queer. The guy looks like an effeminate queer. And you should see the reaction. One guy called me a fat, bald Jew. Well, I thought I had lost weight and I thought I was getting muscular. Bald, yeah. Spiritual Jew, yes. I'm a spiritual Israelite, but ethnically, I'm Assyrian. And here goes my buddy, Lloyd. Lloyd, I need your special set of skills.
Who are we taking out, Sam? Who are we taking out?
There's another cult leader named Nick Fuentes, who's anti-Semitic, really seeks to praise Hitler. So he claims to be a Catholic, sadly. So his fanboy.
Yeah, he claims to be a conservative Catholic. Yeah. I've watched some of his stuff. To be honest, I find him to be, the word I think of when I see him is oily.
Be careful. He's got cult followers, man. You should see the things they've been saying to me in the comment section. But
well, I've seen his comments, and I mean, I think he's just wrong. I honestly think he is uninformed. He is heavily biased. He is wrong.
Yeah. Him and Kanye West were on Alex Jones, and Kanye West was praising Hitler. Actually.
I saw that. Yeah, no, I saw that. And I've seen the statements they made. I mean, look, in the future, when there's time, we could do a session on the Talmud and the Jews just to deal with some of those questions.
I would love for you to do that because they're now calling me Zionist. I'm a fat, bald Jew. Now, I thought I lost weight. I was hoping I wasn't fat, but oh well.
Oh, you clearly have. I mean, if you look at you like some years ago, some of your videos, I mean, now it's clearly a massive difference. But also when I did my series on the Talmud, I was called every racist word you can think of. And then also things got really out of hand. I mean, I was working with another guy. I was working with Jan, and it got so bad. He had people literally on his lawn. He had his channel shut down because he had mass flags on his channel, which shut down his 75,000 member channel. He also had, and then also there were some other issues. And then eventually, let's just say the story eventually went to the FBI. It got that bad. It actually got that bad. And in fact, we discovered so much, and it was a huge, huge scene. Let's just put it that way. Give me 1 second, please, Sam. I'll be with you in 1 moment.
No, good. So yeah, guys, this is actually not my old computer. I thought it was on my old computer. Guys, you need to bathe us in prayer. Ask the Lord if he's pleased to bless this channel and preserve it so it doesn't get shut down and I don't fall for their snares, that God will constrain me. May the Holy Spirit bless Lloyd, bless this session, bless us, and fill us to glorify Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Lord Jesus, you are almighty. Rebuke these demons, shut doors of opposition, open doors of blessing, and be magnified. And use your servant, Lloyd, in Jesus' name. So whenever you're ready, we're ready, brother.
Yeah, I think I'm ready.
Yeah, my throat takes me a while for my throat to warm up. Me. By the way, as he's getting his presentation ready so I can share it on screen, make sure all of you watch my response to Sabil Ahmed part 5. We went super in-depth on Mark chapter 12, verses 29-30, and I showed from Mark 12 how Jesus affirmed the Trinity. A must-watch. Topics already discussed in the past, but we're creatures of repetition, so glory to Father, Son, Spirit. All right, here we go.
Yeah. Also, thanks last night for joining me for the discussion on the Didache.
It was
really impactful. I've actually done additional work. I went back based on the feedback and I added some additional information. So next week, I think will be even harder hitting because it's going to be backed up by even more history to verify what we have said. So that it really leaves the Protestant position, and I say this as a Protestant, very, very shaky, incredibly doubtful. So for me, this is, it's, what do you do? What do you say when you find this information? What do you do?
You have one of two choices: ignore it, distort it, or just simply accept it and change your worldview. That's what I'm doing by the grace of God. So,
yeah. Okay, so here's where we are. So thanks all for joining us. We're going to be discussing whether or not Hitler was a devout Christian, practicing Christianity, and operating out of a Christian worldview, mindset, Christian instructions, Christian instruction manual, whatever. A simple question to ask any of these critics who say, well, Hitler was a Christian. Well, Stalin was a Christian. Well, Stalin was a Catholic. Well, Marx was a Catholic. Of course, this conflicts with people say, well, Marx was a Jew. So I don't know, pick which day he was a Catholic, which day he was a Jew, if someone can help me out here. But very simply, okay, if Hitler was a practicing Christian and a devout Catholic, please tell me, which church was he attending? Did he follow the sacraments? Just let me know. Is there evidence from his friends that he was going to church regularly? Was he building churches? Was he a patron of the church? The answer to that is obviously no. Right? So basically, these people are lying to you, whether they are doing so knowingly or whether they're doing so out of ignorance. Either way, it's a lie that's being proposed to you. Okay, so was Hitler a religious Christian? Historical data versus atheist and Islamic propaganda. Let's deal with this. Okay, so Hitler's views on Christianity, and I know there's lots of quotes, but let's start with some of his own quotes. I shall never come personally to terms with the Christian lie. Now, that's something you say when you're a good Catholic. You say Christianity is a lie and I'm never going to come to terms with it. He also says the reason why the ancient world was so pure, the pagan world, he's referring here to the pagan world, was so pure, light and serene, was that it knew nothing of the two great scourges, the pox and Christianity. He's basically saying the two worst things to happen to the ancient world was the plague and Christianity. Now, when you compare Christianity to a plague, that obviously is what's known as Catholicism, right, Sam? Am I correct?
Yeah. So, just by pox, is he talking about the Jews?
I think he's talking about disease. I don't know. Who knows? I actually didn't look into that.
No, good. Okay. But when you said the pox in Christianity, I was thinking he's calling Jews like a plague, but I may be reading too much into it.
Yeah, I don't actually know. I haven't looked into it that deeply on this particular quote. He says Christianity is a prototype of Bolshevism. Bolshevism is, of course, the whole Leninist communist vibe to take over Russia, the whole revolutionary violent ideology that took over Russia and destroyed Russia, right? The mobilization by the Jew of the masses of slaves with the object of undermining society. So if you're a Christian, you have been recruited, whether unknowingly or knowingly, by the Jews as a slave to their ideology to undermine society. That's the definition of a good Christian, I would think. It sounds Baptist to me, to be honest. It's less Catholic, more Baptist.
And by the way, to confirm that, Nick's fangirls accuse me of being a Jew or being backed up by the Jews. It's ironic Hitler would say the same thing.
Yeah, dude. So seriously, I mean, look, we can look at his ideas and we can take them apart later, but I don't believe a word Nick Fuentes says. I think he's a slimy, slippery individual. So, yeah, don't disagree with me. I'm black, and that would be racist to disagree with me. So just, right, Sam? Okay.
White power.
Pure Christianity, the Christianity of the catacombs, is concerned with translating the Christian doctrine into facts. It leads quite simply, to the annihilation of mankind. It is merely wholehearted Bolshevism under a tinsel of metaphysics. So Christianity leads to annihilation. It will destroy mankind. It is the ruin of mankind. Actually, now that I think of it, it sounds more Lutheran than even Baptist. Maybe a little bit Calvinist there. Leave the hair splitting to others, whether it's the Old Testament or the New, or simply the sayings of Jesus. It's all the same old Jewish swindle. You're simply being swindled and cheated by the Jews. It will not make us free. A German church, a German Christianity is a distortion. One is either a German or a Christian. You cannot be both. I think he's preaching there for Calvinism. What do you think? He's trying to promote Calvinism with that?
Double predestination here. Really sounds like Institutes of John Calvin.
Yep. Martin Bormann, in Conversation with Hitler, any doctrine which is anti-Christian must ipso facto be anti-Jewish as well. The National Socialist doctrine is therefore anti-Jewish in excelsis, in the extreme, for it is both anti-communist and anti-Christian. So National Socialism is anti-Christian. It was then that the future St. Paul distorted with diabolical cunning the Christian idea. The religion fabricated by Paul of Tarsus, which was later called Christianity, is nothing but the communism of today. Do you know of another group that claims that Paul of Tarsus fabricated a religion, Sam?
That's what I was about to say. That's so ironic. Sounds so Mohammedan, but nothing to do with Islam.
Never anything to do with Islam. Islam has, I can tell you, Sam, I can assure you, Sam, Islam itself has nothing to do with Islam.
Exactly. Finally, you got it.
It is inconceivable that an educated priest should really believe all the nonsense that the church pours out. So these are quotes from Hitler and from those people around Hitler. We're going to be covering a lot of these as we go, along with the historical context. Okay? Clerical fascism. So I just want to raise this point here. So Christianity in its pure state stirred the population to revolt. Rome was Bolshevized, and Bolshevism produced exactly the same results in Rome as later in Russia. So the Leninist and Stalinist takeover of Russia, the destruction of the Russian people, the destruction of 49,000 or 50,000 churches, this is what Christianity does and what it did to Rome and what Christianity does to civilization, right? I can imagine people being enthusiastic about the paradise of Muhammad. Hitler says he can see people being enthusiastic about the paradise of Muhammad. Now, do make a note, and I can show you this later if you want, but a certain man called Lucifer says something very similar.
Wow.
Yeah, he actually does. But as for the insipid paradise of the Christians, Christianity is an invention of sick brains. One could imagine nothing more senseless, nor any more indecent way of turning the idea of the Godhead into a mockery. So Christianity is senseless, an invention of sick brains, and it mocks God. A Negro with his tabus is crushingly superior to the human being who seriously believes in transubstantiation.
Sounds like an outstanding member of the Catholic Church.
It does. He does. Where does he preach? I need to go there on Sundays.
Yeah.
Now, clerical fascism refers to a political ideology. Now, look, the word fascism is overused. It is used out of context. It is just thrown at everything. Just like the word racist is thrown at your dog because your dog peed on the neighbor's lawn. Okay? So clerical fascism refers to a political ideology that seeks to bring church into cooperation with the fascist movement. It's simply the combination of church and state. Now, who was the person in the 16th century that wanted to bring the church into cooperation with the state? Hold on, there's a guy. His name is Martin Luther
King, the liberator. Oh.
No. He was black, so you can't say anything bad about him. We're talking about a different Martin from the 16th century, son. So Martin Luther aligned the church with the state. The church had to become subservient to the state, to serve the state. It involves individuals who, as both party members and individuals, take an active part in church life and seek to use the church to advance the goals of the fascist political movement. By this definition, Nazism had its clerical fascist wing. This is not to say it was fascism. Fascism is a particular ideology. It's a form, a strain of socialism that was prevalent in Italy, right? But the term does not and is not intended to describe the Nazi regime as a whole. But they had a clerical fascist wing to take the church and make it a part of the state and a reflection of the state ideology. So we will be discussing that. In the short term, Hitler was prepared to restrain his anti-clericalism, seeing a danger in strengthening the church by persecution. That's Alan Bullock in Hitler, a study in tyranny. So Hitler had to restrain himself from wanting to wipe out the church because he feared that this would actually create martyrs and thus strengthen the church. And we will discuss that at length. Yes, Sam?
Yeah, I just want to real quickly understand. Hitler realized, I won't interrupt him. I'll try to keep it to a bare minimum, but understand, Hitler realized that the more you persecute the church, the more Christians you kill, the more Christians you produce. And that's true historically. Even Tertullian is attributed with saying, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. The more Christians are persecuted, the more they're filled and emboldened by the Holy Spirit to be more zealous for Jesus and more converts as a result. And Hitler knew if he persecuted church, that would lead to the explosion of the church, not to its demise. He even knew that.
Yep. Now, we'll talk about that at length later in the episode. As we get towards the end, we will discuss that. We'll discuss his specific statements and strategy around that. Now, this is from Politics, Religion and Ideology, Totalitarian Movements and Political Religions by a very well-known historian called Richard Steigman Gall, the Nazis and Positive Christianity, a variety of clerical fascism. So I don't know who's heard of positive Christianity before, right? But the Germans decided, well, we need our own version of Christianity, and they created positive Christianity. Why? Because your version of Christianity is negative. You see, so now we need to create a positive Christianity. Sam, this negative Christianity must go. We need to start our own religion, and we'll call it positive Christianity.
All you need to do is go to Joel Osteen's church. Come on, man. He's positive.
Very fast. Okay, so Hitler says, all propaganda has to be popular and has to accommodate itself to the comprehension of the least intelligent of those to whom it seeks to reach. Right? Keep that in mind. By the skillful and sustained use of propaganda, one can make a people see even heaven as hell or an extremely wretched life as paradise. Those are Hitler's words. Hitler believed Christianity was a tool used by the Jews to destroy nations. Christianity in its Bolshevistic form destroyed art and civilization. Christianity invented class warfare, which required anti-Jewish measures from the National Socialists. Christianity was the first creed in the world to exterminate its adversaries in the name of love. Right? Christianity's main theme is intolerance. We're going to be discussing all of this, right? These are just the highlights. Bolshevism was Christianity's illegitimate child, and both were inventions of the Jew. Now, lots of people will tell you, but Marx was a Jew, and the Jews created communism, because they are literally repeating Hitler word for word. Now, personally, I think that when you are repeating the words of Hitler word for word, maybe that doesn't make you a good person or a smart person, but that's just my view. The deliberate lie in the matter of religion was introduced to the world by Christianity. The deliberate lie. So a religion that would deliberately lie to you, which is what he claims the Christian religion is, was introduced by Christianity as the first false religion, which destroyed the beautiful pagan religions of the past and persecuted the pagan priests. Okay? We're going to be touching on these points. We're going to be working through this. Hitler believed that Christ was an Aryan. We're going to be going into that in some detail. And St. Paul used his doctrine to mobilize the criminal underworld and organize a proto-Bolshevism. So St. Paul mobilized the criminal terrorist underworld of Rome to overthrow Rome and replace it with a criminal, dishonest theocracy. And they wanted to do the same in Germany, and the Christians had to be stopped.
But
is this all making sense? Sorry?
Christ was an Aryan. Supposedly Christ was good, though, because he's an Aryan, but Paul is the bad guy.
Yes, Christ was not a Jew.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He was from India. He was from Iran. He was from the Scandinavian countries, Sam. He was a Indian, Iranian, Scandinavian. Actually, from the area in Syria as well. So he was an Indian, Syrian, Scandinavian, Iranian, Sam. Get with the program. So, Hitler's table talks. Now, we need to discuss this very briefly because you will literally see scholars on all sides of this particular thing. But the general consensus, sadly for you, is that these are authentic. Okay? These talks, these collected works of Hitler's have never been shown to be false. They've never been falsified. Okay. The first two, I don't know if that's even true, because the Nazis were degenerate. And I don't know how true that is. Okay, so this is the new edition. This is the latest edition with a foreword by Gerd Weinberg by Trevor Roper. The only complete record of Hitler's private thoughts and plans with additional documents and materials. So the authenticity of the table talks, also known as the Hitler-Bormann monologues, is debated. Fine. A series of informal conversations between Adolf Hitler and his inner circle that took place between 1941 and 44, recorded by Heinrich Heim, the stenographer, who later had them edited by Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary. We will be discussing this as we go. It is believed Bormann made edits to the transcripts to portray Hitler in a more positive light. So what we're going to see is some pretty bad quotes, but apparently they were cleaned up, removing sensitive or controversial topics such as the Holocaust. Holocaust means death by fire, basically. It means fire. Some argue that the German version should be treated with caution and that the English translation based on earlier transcripts is more reliable. Of course, other scholars say the English versions are horrid and unreliable, and one should only use the German versions because those are reliable. And then, of course, you'll have some will say, so I've been reading through this, it's a complete mess. So you will find whatever argument you present, someone will argue the exact opposite. Let's just say some of it is really just noise to confuse the issue. Okay? Southern Italian, kind of like Hitler. Yes, yes, yes. Right. Now, efforts are made to discredit the English version due to a man called Richard Carrier.
By the way,
he cleaned up Berlin. You're on the wrong side of history. Now, this guy's using the term wrong side of history, which is actually a Soviet Marxist term. Okay? So are you a Marxist?
No, he's a neo-Nazi. He's a neo-Nazi. So we got another dog. Barking, so stuff him with his vomit. Mods, get rid of this satanic bastard. He's a neo-Nazi who rejoices that Jews and others were gassed. But if it was his mother and father, we'll see what he would be saying about it.
Yeah.
Get this dog
and besides, also I know he got Berlin bombed to bits. So I don't know if that was cleaning it up even more, using dynamite and bombs from the air. But so efforts are made to discredit the English version due to an atheist called Richard Carrier, formerly of the New Atheist movement, okay? And basically, Hitler bad, Christians bad, therefore Hitler equals Christian. That's really all it boils down to. Hitler bad, Christians bad, therefore Hitler equals Christian. Right, let's have a look. This is a book by Richard Carrier called Jesus from Outer Space. What the earliest Christians really believed about Christ. So, yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, that sounds really credible. That's great. Yeah. Okay, Jesus from Outer Space. Do you know Jesus was a spaceman, Sam?
You mean this guy's time when I thought he was the creator of heaven and earth, I was wrong? Oh, man, thank you.
He was a spaceman. And also notice he's got the words P, the letters PH and B after his name. It's Latin for piled high and deep. Yeah, it's Latin for piled high and deep. There you go. Glad I can clear that up. Okay, so now let's have a look at this particular. This is Hitler Redux, okay, by Mikael Nielsen, a historian that came out recently, I believe in 2021, with a book that is just nuts. On the one hand, he argues and says, well, he tries to discredit the table talks, but in the other half of the book, he says that the table talks cannot be discredited; they are authentic. Let's take a few quotes from this. However, this is very important. The results presented in this book should absolutely not be interpreted as meaning that the table talks are not authentic. He actually contradicts his own previous statements. So he says that his book, the results in his book should not lead you to think that the table talks are not authentic. Right? This guy's talking out of both sides of his mouth, you'll find. They really are, at least for the most part, memoranda of statements that Hitler made at some point or another in his wartime headquarters. So they are legitimate statements, right? And they were made by either Heim, Picker, Muller, or Bormann, although there are also some notes that have no names attached to them. So basically, this guy is stating that the table talks are false, and many, many people want to use his work, this book of his, Hitler Redux, to claim that the table talks are inauthentic, and they'll use quotes from it. But in the final analysis, this is what he says, that are authentic. Okay, so that's just to get that out of the way. So do you know the Jesus, Richard? Because Richard knows the Jesus. Have you heard of the Jesus, Sam? So did Jesus die in outer space? Oh, I don't know. I didn't do that one in school. evaluating a key claim in Richard Carrier's On the Historicity of Jesus. The attempt to use later sources interpreted in ways that are at best open to dispute is an attempt to argue against what generations of skeptical scholars have concluded to be likely with respect to the early Christian sources, and it is never going to make mythicism seem more probable than the hard-earned and intensely researched consensus of historians and scholars, namely that there was a historical Jesus of Nazareth. So this atheist who thinks Jesus died in outer space, because Jesus was from outer space, is a Jesus mythicist. So, and we've got to take this man's work as credible, right? So this is Richard Carrier, and he's why invent the Jesus? Because the Jesus was invented. Richard Carrier piled high and deep. Yes. Why I'm not a Christian? Richard Carrier, you see? Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ by Richard Carrier. So yeah, you can see, real fan. He's genuinely a fan, clearly unbiased. Okay? So yeah, any comment on that, Sam, before I go on?
So I'm baffled with Richard Carrier. He's a mythicist, but he is admitting that appealing to later sources that are not credible to try to debunk the view of Jesus held by Christians is not going to work, because serious, credible scholars, historians, do believe that the earlier sources, like the Gospels, when you apply the historical method, demonstrate conclusively there's an historical Jesus. So now I'm confused. If he doesn't believe Jesus exists, what the hell is he talking about, Jesus dying in outer space?
Sam, can we just move on? My brain wants to, it's hurting.
Nothing to do with Islam. Let's move on.
Okay, so atheists peddle in propaganda. So guys, this is my setup, and we're going to dive deep into the history. We're going to go into a lot of detail, but so atheists peddle in propaganda. That's a blunt statement because it's fact. The intention is to examine history in detail to see if the atheist and Muslim claims that Hitler was a Christian, because they always make that statement and then just stop there, okay? But we'll continue with that. Let's see if that is true with any factual validity. The claim is propaganda. It is meant to imply that Hitler was acting from Christian doctrine and thus discredit the faith. Like I said, ask them where he went to church, etc., who his priest was. Go through all of that stuff. Ask him, give me the facts. Give me the facts. You guys love the facts. You guys are atheists. You're all scientific and nonsense. So this talk should demonstrate that the atheist evangelists, the atheist apologists, the atheist propagandists, and Muslim Dawah propaganda practitioners are lazy, generally ignorant, easily led, gullible, stupid, and malicious. You can quote me on that. So Jesus, Christianity, and the Bible were shaped by the political and ideological needs of Nazi Germany. And we're going to go into depth as to what and how that occurred. Einstein would not be impressed with these foolish atheists. Okay, so Nazi, positive Christianity. So let's begin. Hitler and the Nazis sought to replace traditional Christianity with positive Christianity. They attacked the church in Germany by attempting to bring it under state control and persecuting Christian leaders who opposed their regime. So the priests were often influential leaders in the community, and so they were sought out by the Nazis. They were hunted by the Nazis when they needed to silence them. Thousands of priests were forced into concentration camps. Most were made to die slowly of starvation and disease. A special barracks was even set up at Dachau, the camp near Munich, Germany, for clergymen, because that's what you do. You create a concentration camp for priests when you are pro-church. So the Nazi idea of positive Christianity allayed fears in Germany's Christian majority by implying that the Nazi movement was not anti-Christian. They needed the vote. Remember, when Hitler came to power, he needed the vote. He needed to appease the Christian majority. So Hans Kerrl, Nazi Minister for Church Affairs in 1937, confirmed Nazi hostility to the Catholic and Protestant creeds in an address during an intense phase of what's called the Nazi Kirchenkampf, the Nazi fight against the church, Kirchenkampf, okay? The party stands on the basis of positive Christianity, and positive Christianity is National Socialism. So the Nazis believed that they were pursuing Christianity, that National Socialism was a true version of Christianity, the true version of Christianity. Just like Muslims will tell you, Islam is the true Christianity. National Socialism is the doing of God's will. God's will reveals itself in German blood. Dr. Zillner and the Catholic Bishop of Münster, Count Galen, have tried to make it clear to me that Christianity consists in faith in Christ as the Son of God. That makes me laugh. No, Christianity is not dependent upon the Apostles' Creed. True Christianity is represented by the Nazi Party, and the German people are now called by the party, and especially the Führer, to a real Christianity, and the Führer is the herald of a new revelation. Your thoughts, Sam?
Notice how, in the spirit of Protestantism, I'm sorry, Protestants, I don't want to upset you, honestly. I'm not saying, I want to be clear, I'm not saying I don't believe there are hundreds of thousands of Protestants who love Jesus Christ, belong to the Lord. Obviously, I believe that. What I'm saying is, you see the attitude towards the ancient creeds? You see what he just said about the Apostles' Creed? This disdain and hatred for the creeds of the ancient church, the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. You find that attitude amongst Protestants, typified by Martin Luther, John Calvin, but especially in philosophers like William Lane Craig. Isn't it ironic? They all want to destroy and disassociate themselves from the ancient creeds of the church, Lloyd?
Look, history is not kind, I think, to a lot of people's ideas. When you go back to the source, when you go back to the roots, it tends to show that the foundation they stand upon is extremely shaky. So that would be one reason why. So he says here, okay, Christianity is not dependent upon the Apostles' Creed. All right, so okay, let's have a look further. Now, obviously, now he's saying that true Christianity is represented. The Nazi Party is the true Christianity. That the Christianity is not true Christianity, and the Führer, being the herald of a new revelation, he is the new Messiah. So now this is but Christianity is an invention of sick brains. Okay, one could imagine nothing more senseless, nor anything more indecent of turning the idea of the Godhead into a mockery. Right? This is Hitler, Religions and Peoples. Those are Hitler's words. Now, these are Muslim words from a Muslim textbook which teaches anti-Christian. It's an anti-Christian polemic by Ibn Qayyim. The prayer of the Christians, the Nazarenes, ridicules the worshipped deity. So the prayer of the Christians ridicules and mocks God. The Christians chose a way of prayer during which the most devoted among them would consider it no great matter if he happens to have passed urine dripping on his thighs and legs. Now, I could go on with this at length, okay? I can bring up the whole reference. But it basically claims that Christians mock God in their prayers, in their church practice, and also Christians would happily, literally urinate all over themselves and all over the pews in church, and they wouldn't consider it a problem. So notice the parallels here between Islam and the way Hitler is speaking about Christianity. Right, Hitler was made victorious through terror. Now, we've got your Mein Kampf. They politely call it Mein Struggle, but we all know that jihad is also called struggle, but it is really the fight. Yeah, so Mein fight, Mein jihad. Yeah, we will call this one Mein jihad. Yeah, so Hitler wrote Mein jihad, right? The official 1939 editions. A philosophy of life which is inspired by an infernal spirit of intolerance. That is Christianity, according to to this guy. And it can only be set aside by a doctrine that is advanced in an equally ardent spirit and fought for with as determined a will, and which is itself a new idea, pure and absolutely true. So Nazism is pure and absolutely true, and it must fight against Christianity because Christianity is a spirit of intolerance. And infernal means from hell, right? Each one of us today may regret the fact that the advent or the beginning of Christianity was the first occasion on which spiritual terror was introduced into the much freer ancient world. The pagans had it good, and then the Christians came along and unleashed terror into the world. But the fact cannot be denied that ever since then, the world is pervaded and dominated by this kind of coercion, and that violence is broken only by violence and terror by terror. So Hitler must fight violence, Christian violence with violence, and the terror of Christianity with terror. Your thoughts, Sam?
So, according to him, the version of Christianity spread by Paul is destructive, intolerant, and therefore we have to be intolerant and destructive, adopting the very thing he accuses Christianity of. So he wants to become the very thing and is the very thing that he's condemning Christianity for.
Yeah, but he will be made victorious through terror. Do you know of someone else who...
Oh, wasn't that the Apostle Paul? Oh, darn it. Nothing to do with Islam.
Nothing to do with Islam. Yeah. Right. Nazis and positive Christianity. This man over here, the Nazi ideologist, the political and social thought of Alfred Rosenberg, very important man, one of the very highest ally of, well, within the Nazi regime, within the political regime. He was the head of ideology, right? So this man was very, very close to the big guy, right? So Hitler's public presentations of positive Christianity differed. Despite proclaiming a unified peace with Christian churches, positive Christianity advocates sought to distance themselves from the Jewish origins of Christ and the Bible. Right? Now, if you look at the original, one of the earliest, if you look at Wycliffe's Bible, again, he also attempted to separate Christianity from its Jewish origins. This is the very same thing that the Nazis wanted to do. So, because they wanted the Bible to align with Nazi anti-Semitism or hatred of Jews, and is thus considered, so positive Christianity thus separated itself from Nicene Christianity, and is thus considered apostate by Trinitarian Christian churches, regardless of whether they are Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, or Protestant. Now, Hitler consistently identified himself in his speeches, at least in the early phase, when he was getting, when he wanted votes and he wanted to maintain public calm, as a Christian. So Hitler stated he was a Christian, and even on occasion as a Catholic. So he called himself a Christian, and on occasion even a Catholic, specifically throughout his entire political career, despite criticizing biblical figures. So he identified himself, for instance, as a Christian in a 12 April 1922 speech. Hitler identified as a Christian in Mein Kampf. But of course, he defines Christianity completely differently to the way Christians define Christianity. Right? He redefined the Bible, he redefined Jesus, he redefined the doctrine, he rejected basic doctrine, but he was a Christian, right? The true Christian, right? However, historians, including Ian Kershaw and Lawrence Rees, amongst others, characterize his acceptance of the term positive Christianity and his political involvement in religious policy as being driven by opportunism and a pragmatic recognition of the political importance of the Christian churches in Germany. He was just a politician making a claim because it was politically expedient. Sam.
Just like politicians, understand what you're being told. Understand. Just like you have politicians today in America who claim to be Catholic, like Biden and Pelosi, and yet will support legislation to murder unborn children, which is murder, it's not abortion, and also will legislate to give the same rights to homosexual, lesbian relationships, transgenderism, and yet they claim to be Catholic because they're using their Catholic identity to get Catholic voters because they're not really Catholic from the heart. That's what Hitler did. You understand? Nothing new under the sun. Claim to be Christian Catholic when it will get you the support to put you in power than to dominate and destroy and kill and murder. That's what Hitler did. That's what the politicians are doing now. Same strategy.
Right. So positive Christianity, because it's not negative Christianity. It is a vague plank of the original 25-point program of the National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterspartei, German Workers' Party. Positive Christianity was an attempt to create a new state religion by uniting Protestant sects into a single church. Why? Because the Catholics gave him too much stick. He knew the Catholics would never buy into this.
I thought the Pope was on his side. What are you talking about, you Jesuit?
We will be talking about that. Sam, that was very low. That was low. That was low, Sam. You called me a Jesuit. I'm going to need therapy after this. So its doctrine proclaimed that Christ was Aryan. Now remember, the Aryans was the German race, pure. Christ was an Aryan, not a Jew. It downplayed or eliminated the Old Testament because it was too Jewish. It attempted to shoehorn themes of a struggle between the Aryans and the Jews into the New Testament, and Jesus was a victim of the dirty Jew because, he was fighting against them, right? Remember, they were uniting Protestant sects. This was a Protestant movement, right? The Germans actually created, sadly, the Nazis created their own New Testament written by their own theologians. We'll be talking about all of this in detail. Its ideas were never clearly elucidated. It never caught on, though, in any significant way, but they did create it is sometimes called the Hitler Bible, but it was never called a Bible by them, right? The term positive Christianity originally indicated a secular and non-denominational, but vaguely pro-Christian attitude on the part of the NSDAP, right? So let's dive in more. Hitler became the Messiah, and he brought a new revelation, a new religion. So efforts to impose a Nazified positive Christianity on a state-controlled German evangelical church essentially failed. This failure resulted in the formation of the dissident Confessing Church, which saw great danger to Germany from the new religion. So that's the Confessing Church we'll discuss briefly. Now, the Catholic Church denounced the Creed's blood and soil ideology in the 1937 papal encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, with burning concern or with burning anxiety. Hitler privately assured Gerald Gerhard Engel in 1941 that I am now as before a Catholic, and I will always remain so. The reason he would have to say so to a high-ranking army member is that the SS was the private Nazi army, but the rest of the army was very conservative and generally Christian. So he had to mollify the German army leadership. Now, the official Nazi ideologist Alfred Rosenberg played an important role in the development of positive Christianity, which he conceived as a doctrine that was in opposition to the Roman Catholic Church, and also the Protestant churches, whose doctrines he called negative Christianity. And also, Rosenberg is known for his rejection of and hatred of Christianity. So let's get into this section here. This is going to be interesting. So I thought I'd start with this, Sam, because you raised it early on. Slandering the Pope. What is the source of the slanders against Pope Pius XII? So the Pope versus Hitler, communists versus the Pope. Well, let's have a look at that. This is on my channel. You're welcome to have a look at this as well if you want to see this. But I cover this in some more depth than I'm doing here now. The Pope versus Hitler. So Albert Einstein, who died in 1955, had very high praise of the Catholic authorities. In the Time magazine, December 23rd, 1940 edition, on pages 38 to 41, Einstein says, "The best tribute to the spirit of Germany's Christians comes from a Jew and an agnostic, the world's most famous scientist, Albert Einstein." He said, "Only the church stood squarely across the path of Hitler's campaign. I am forced thus to confess that what I once despised, I now praise unreservedly." This is Albert Einstein talking about the Catholic Church and talking about the Pope. Pius described Hitler as a false prophet of Lucifer in a 1935 open letter to the Bishop of Cologne, Germany. And Pacelli, that was his family name, condemned the Nazis and anti-Semitism in 40 of 44 speeches he gave while serving as Cardinal Secretary of the State of the Holy See. Chaim Weizmann, Israel's first president, highly praises Pius. "The Holy See is lending its powerful help wherever it can to mitigate the fate of my persecuted co-religionists." He's here, the first president of Israel. He's praising how the Pope and the Catholic Church has been saving and rescuing Jews. Moshe Shadet, Israel's second prime minister, met with Pius in the closing days of the war and told him that my first duty was to thank him, and through him, the Catholic Church, on behalf of the Jewish public for all they had done in the various countries to rescue Jews. Let's continue. And the book in the background here is The Pope's Jews, the Vatican's secret plan to save Jews from the Nazis. Right, let's continue. Mit brennender Sorge. Now, this encyclical, with burning anxiety, with burning concern, was written in German specifically for the Germans. Now, typically, these are written in Latin. It was written by Pope Pius XII, that's a typo, to the German bishops in 1937, expressing his concerns about the Nazi regime's treatment of the Catholic Church in Germany. It emphasizes the importance of upholding religious duty and education, defending the truth, and maintaining faith in God during times of persecution. He tells the Catholic faithful to show heroism and to be generous in suffering, to face the oppressors of the Church with the strength of their faith and charity. He emphasizes that every true and lasting reform is ultimately sprung from the sanctity of men who are driven by the love of God and of men. The Pope stresses that faith in the Church cannot stand pure and true without the support of faith in the primacy of the Bishop of Rome. He also sends his words of gratitude and commendation to those who suffer persecution and to all those imprisoned in jail and concentration camps. Right? Christians and priests and bishops were in jail and concentration camps. Finally, he addresses Catholic parents, telling them to sever their responsibility from the Nazis and to free their conscience from guilty cooperation with the Nazi state. Hitler was infuriated. It caused intensified Nazi persecution of the Catholic Church. Yep, wow. Sam, you're on mute. Yeah.
So here you have Einstein and other Jews acknowledging and praising the Pope and his efforts to save Jewish lives, and the Pope comes out and condemns the Nazi party, and Hitler is infuriated, so he persecutes and kills Catholics all the more. Yet all this time, I thought Hitler was a Jesuit. Darn you. Nothing to do.
Okay, let's move on. So, with burning concern, the retribution. So, 12 printing presses were seized from the Catholics, and hundreds of people in response were sent either to prison or to concentration camps as a result. In his diary, Goebbels wrote that there were heightened verbal attacks on the clergy from Hitler, and he wrote that Hitler had approved the start of trumped-up immorality trials against clergy and an anti-church propaganda campaign in response to the Pope's words. Goebbels' orchestrated attack included a staged morality trial of 37 Franciscan monks. On the church question, Goebbels wrote, "After the war, it has to be generally solved. There is namely an insoluble opposition between the Christian and a heroic German worldview." So, in other words, he's saying, look, between us and the Catholics, there is no way of coming to terms. We need to solve the church question. Now, they solved the Jewish question. We know how. They were going to solve the church question the same way. In the Hegelian heroic view, the heroic man stood above conventional morality. So, in other words, the Nazis stood outside of normal moral convention because they were the heroic men. Yes, Sam?
That sounds like Muhammad. He's a heroic man, and he stands above his own ethical moral system. So they could have 4 wives, he could have much more, and he can also lust for a married woman. Wow, so Muhammad is a hero after all. Nothing to do with Islam.
Yes, so that's Hegelian, and Hegel was a Hermetic Gnostic. Let's put it that way. He was just loopy, right? Seriously loopy, and he influenced Marx heavily. Let's continue. Persecution. Now, William Shirer, I've discussed him before, Protestant, who has some very honest and very painful things to say about a man called Luther, wrote on the Concordat, and he says that this is where everyone says, well, the Catholic Church signed an agreement with the Nazi state. Well, the Catholic Church has an agreement with every state. The Catholic Church tries to cooperate with everyone because it wants to be able to operate in those countries without being killed, which generally is considered fairly reasonable. So the Concordat was hardly put to paper before it was being broken by the Nazi government. On 25 July, the Nazis promulgated their sterilization law. In other words, if you were black, and if you were not purebred, if you were like retarded or, et cetera, you had to be sterilized. They couldn't have your dirty genes infecting the pure Aryan gene pool. An offensive policy in the eyes of the Catholic Church. 5 days later, they moved to dissolve the Catholic Youth League. Catholic children are only allowed to join the Nazi Youth League. And of course, the Nazi Youth League met on Sundays, just when the Catholic Youth League would meet. Clergy and nuns and lay leaders were targeted, leading to thousands of arrests over the ensuing years. Thousands of arrests, often on trumped-up charges of currency smuggling or immorality. This is an image of prisoners of war, Catholic priests mostly, that were imprisoned and now were released after the war. In the face of this persecution, Pope Pius XI, was it 12th? I could get it wrong, issued his Mit brennender Sorge encyclical, which denounced the pagan ideology of Nazism. In response, hundreds more clergy were arrested and sent to the concentration camps. Right? So Catholic schools, the press, the Catholic press, Catholic trade unions, political parties, and youth leagues were eradicated. Anti-Catholic propaganda and morality trials were staged. Monasteries and convents were targeted for expropriation, which is exactly what, oddly enough, the Protestants did when when the Protestant movement started. They took lands, money, possessions from Catholics. They did exactly the same thing. Prominent Catholic lay leaders were murdered and thousands of Catholic activists were arrested. In all, an estimated 1/3 of German priests faced some form of reprisal in Nazi Germany, and 400 German priests were sent to the dedicated priest barracks of Dachau concentration camps. Of 2,720 clergy that were imprisoned at Dachau from Germany and occupied territories, 2,579, or 94.88%, were Catholic. Any thoughts on this, Sam?
So Hitler, being a very good Catholic, who loved the Catholic Church, who fought for the Catholic Church, ended up having Catholics killed and imprisoned and tortured and slandered and their property stolen because he was a good Catholic working for the Jesuits. See, now you convinced me. All along, he was a good Catholic.
Yeah, no, definitely. He was definitely. Yep. So, okay, so let's continue, right? Polish prisoners in Dachau, that's the picture in the background, toasted liberation from the camp. Poles constituted the largest ethnic group in the camp and the largest proportion of those imprisoned in the priest barracks of Dachau. Now, what's interesting, as I've said before, everyone knows Hitler hated the Jews. And of course, he attacked the Jews. Yet, he wanted to wipe out the Polish population. And you don't see him saying a word about the Poles. So if he didn't say anything about the Poles and wanted to murder them, imagine how much worse his view was of the Jews and how much more he wanted to do to them. Right. Word for word, the case against the Nazis are Hitler's forces planned to destroy German Christianity. From the New York Times. The New York Times is an ultra-right-wing paper supported by Donald Trump, I believe. Right, Sam?
And backed up financially by the Jesuits.
Correct. Okay. According to Baldur von Schirach, the Nazi leader of the German Youth Corps that would later be known as the Hitler Youth, the destruction of Christianity was explicitly recognized as a purpose of the National Socialist movement. From the beginning, though, the considerations of expedience made it impossible to destroy Christianity outright, right? For the movement to adopt this radical stance officially until it had consolidated power.
Sounds like another religious movement that stealthily seeks to dominate until it has consolidated power and then destroy and subjugate Christianity and others. Nothing to do with Islam.
Yeah. So be peaceful until you are uppermost, right? And then, yeah. So I think what it's crazy that Hitler was this staunch Catholic, and yet his entire government was persecuting and killing and looting thousands of Catholics, without his knowledge. Isn't that crazy, Sam?
Because you know why? He was too busy praying the rosary and fasting during Lent, so he didn't know what was going on. Only had he known what they were doing to his Catholic Church. Darn you people.
And he was stuck in church too much praying, obviously. Right, so this is Protestant support for the Nazis. Okay, let's have a look. Percentage of Nazi votes, 1932. Percentage of Catholics in Germany. So the Nazi votes came from these areas marked in black. Okay? And the Catholics on this side, now have a look. What do you see is the relationship between the Nazi votes and the Catholics in Germany, Sam? What is the relationship between these two maps?
So hold on. You're telling me Hitler, who's pro-Catholic, did not have the support of a huge portion of Catholics.
No.
And Protestants who are anti-Catholic, many of them, they're the ones who supported Hitler in droves more so than the Catholics did. This is just a Jesuit propaganda, sir. I don't believe you.
Facts are Jesuit. So yeah, we're going to have to get rid of facts, I guess. So we can see very clearly from this map, right? The white areas are those who did not vote for Hitler, right? Those are the Catholic areas. And you can see here, right, that the ones who voted for him were sadly the Protestants. The Catholics refused to vote for the Nazis. Right? Let's continue. They collaborate. Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about this. Okay, this is a book called Hitler and the Vatican. Okay, inside the secret archives that revealed the new story of the Nazis and the church. All right, so in 1933, the Catholic Church signed a Concordat with the Reich government in Germany to secure the freedom of the church's mission and to protect the faithful from trials and difficulties. The Nazis repeatedly violated the agreement, revealing their true intentions of a war of extermination against the Jews, Christians, and other groups. Now, despite the church's effort to warn Germany's rulers of the consequences of supporting such policies, the Nazis ignored the Concordat, this agreement they had signed with the Catholic Church. The church remained committed to defending violated rights and opposing policies that sought to strangle rights guaranteed by the treaty. However, the church was mindful of potential consequences of taking action and sought to avoid any actions that would bring harm to the faithful. Remember, the Pope had denounced Hitler 40 times out of 44 speeches. And the things he had done had constantly caused retribution. Lava, and that is true, and that is sad. Yeah, there's no evidence for that. Okay? Yes. And unfortunately, that's the history. There's more maps like that. You can actually find more. I mean, look, I didn't stick every single thing I could find in here, right? I've got to limit what I put in, but it shows you that whatever I show you, there's more evidence, obviously, to be dug up on that given topic, right? So we've seen now that whenever the Pope did anything to anger Hitler, there were repercussions. People died, people were sent to prison, people were disappeared, people were starved, people lost their possessions. So there were consequences. So every time the Pope said anything, people in the country suffered. And the Pope realized, I need to take a different approach here because this is causing people to die and people to be persecuted. So many have accused the Catholic Church of collaborating with the Nazis during this time. But this claim is, I can tell you, it's absolutely false. The Church did not support the Nazis' policies and actively worked to defend the rights of the faithful and oppose the Nazis' actions. The historical narrative that Pius was Hitler's Pope is slander. It is not fact. Now, in this book, what is interesting is that what you learn is that the Catholic Church was trying to find a way to work diplomatically. So and unfortunately, they were being lied to and were misled by Mussolini in Italy, right, who happened to be an ally of Hitler. So he was stringing them along. But that said, the Catholics had a very detailed plan, a secret plan, which they were working on their own separately, right? So the myth of Hitler's Pope. Now, this is called the myth of Hitler's Pope, how Pope Pius XII, I know I've got it 11 in my notes, so it's a typo, how Pope Pius XII rescued Jews from the Nazis by Rabbi David G. Dalen. Obviously a Jesuit, clearly Jesuit.
100%, Lloyd.
Yeah, no, the Jesuits are everywhere, Sam. Yes. There could be one hiding under my chair right now.
100%. In fact, he's the one who put a plant in your chair.
So Rabbi David G. Dalen's book debunks the myth that Pope Pius XII was in league with Hitler during the Holocaust. Oh, wow, you have a copy. My gosh.
Let me just put it on the screen. This is the book. I'm going to start reading it. So you've already referenced this. Here it is. This is the book he's referring to. Go ahead.
Great. So the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, was Hitler's general, supported the SS, and promoted the Holocaust. Don't forget, the SS was the private army of the National Socialist Party or the National Communist Party, however you want to phrase that, right? And the largest division within the SS was the Muslim division, right? Let me make that, yes, Sam. The largest division within the SS of 30,000 plus men was the Muslim division.
Nothing to do with Islam, though.
Nothing, ever. We can talk about that in the future. We can do a talk just on that topic. It's fascinating. So he volunteered and he became a general in the Nazi army, right, in the SS. So while Pope Pius XII worked to save Jews from the Nazis, the Grand Mufti was calling for their extermination. The book provides the true history of the Catholic Church's efforts to save Jewish lives during the Holocaust and the Nazi plan to kidnap the Pope. Dalen exposes the agenda of the mythmakers who use the Holocaust to attack the papacy and Christianity. The book is full of shocking and irrefutable details, including the fact that Pope Pius XII deserves to be called a righteous Gentile for his efforts to save Jews. It is a must-read for anyone who wants to learn the truth about the Holocaust and its impact on our culture wars today. Great. I've got an entire series. I've got an entire show. It's about 45 minutes long on my channel. You can get a lot of detail. I go into a lot of the detail on this. But let's talk a bit more. Hitler's Mufti and Hitler's reformer, known as Luther. During Pope Pius XII's lifetime and immediately after his death, secular publications like the New York Times, Jewish groups, and luminaries, from Golda Meir to Albert Einstein and the Nazis themselves, all assessed Pius as an enemy of Nazism and a friend to the Jews. So historically, until the 60s, he was considered, yes, sir?
Golda Meir herself, they're making a movie about her life. By the way, the movie's coming out about her life. It's coming out soon. Golda Meir acknowledged that even the Pope was an enemy of Nazi Germany.
Yeah. We'll have a look at some of this as we go. Yeah. So the author proves that Pius's silence on the Holocaust saved more lives than speaking out against Hitler. I've just shown you some of the examples of what happened when the Pope spoke out. People died. The Pope realized, I've got to keep my mouth shut and work in silence, which is exactly what they did. So Pius's silence created networks in the church that became an underground railroad for saving lives of Jews and other persecuted peoples. The book explains the situations of the time in which Pope Pius had to act. Now, should the church have excommunicated Hitler? Some have said. Dalen provides several historical examples of popes excommunicating politicians and those actions backfiring. There's a guy up here. Yeah, they did that, and we all know what happened. So historians still debate whether the Allies should have bombed the railroads to the concentration camps. That's still being debated. Why didn't the Allies bomb the railroads to the concentration camps? Because the Nazis would have just shot them in the streets like they did in Poland. No one can say whether it would have done any good or not. So Pius could not foresee Nazi policy, nor how his actions would play out. Already they had seen several times when they spoke out against the Nazis, the Catholics died. The churches were attacked. He worked behind the scenes, measuring every word and every act against Nazi retaliation. Today, it is estimated that Pius's diplomatic efforts saved the lives of approximately 800,000 Jews.
Wow. Can I hammer what this rabbi is saying?
Sure.
And by the way, brethren, I haven't read it yet. By the grace of Jesus, I'll try to read and finish it this year. This is from this book, pages 77 to 80. This book. A rabbi, you understand what he's saying? Listen, Orthodox Catholics, Protestants. The rabbi is saying that Pope Pius, being wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, in the words of Jesus, his master, our Lord, whenever the Pope would speak out against Nazi regime, Catholics would be imprisoned, persecuted, killed, and more Jews would be killed. So Pope Pius realized, and this is what the rabbi is saying, if I say something publicly, my words will result in an onslaught on Jews and Catholics, where instead of heeding my exhortation to then oppose the Pope, they would kill more Catholics than Jews. So then Pope Pius realized, I say nothing publicly, but do everything behind the scenes to save lives, telling you how wise this man was. And that's what the rabbi is saying.
Right. So this is a book by a guy called Martin Luther. He invented Christianity in 1537 or 1517. It's called The Jews and Their Lies. In 1543, Hitler wrote a 65,000-word book on the Jews and their lies to demonize the Jews and called for violence against the Jewish people who brought forth Jesus Christ. Every anti-Jewish book printed in Hitler's Third Reich contained references to and quotations from Luther. I will go into depth in this in the future, and I could bring up some references now, but we can, because it lines up somewhat. Yes, so the failed Austrian painter. Yeah. Well,
that was a good one, buddy. Go ahead.
Yeah. So understand the works of this man. So basically, I have shown before on my channel, I've discussed it, and I will again. I'll probably bring it up at some point soon, that his policies, the policies of Martin Luther against Jews, the writings of Martin Luther, the recommendations Luther made of what should be done about the Jews were directly implemented by the Nazi regime. So what the Nazis were doing was exactly, step by step, what this man, Martin Luther, said had to be done to the Jews. Understand, the Nazis were simply implementing his plan.
By the way,
sorry?
Not to cut you up, but could you also affirm, because you know the history better than I do, and Wally Chobat and Theodore also confirmed, and you mentioned it. Is it not true? Now, brethren, listen to this. Even at the time of the Reformation, the reformers were working with the Ottomans to try to destroy the Catholic Church.
Yes, they were. They were collaborating.
Maybe you can briefly comment on that. Protestant reformers, 16th century, were helping the Turks, the Ottoman Islamic Empire, because they thought through the Turkish Empire, Muslims, they could destroy the Catholic Church.
Yeah, let me get that for you. So since we're here, let's actually discuss it.
Watch this.
So let's actually just go there since here we are now. Okay, so for instance, this is Luther saying that Christ was an adulterer. Of course, we know that. He said that Jesus Christ literally slept with 3 women or 4 women. Okay. But now let's go here. Good grief, come on. Why would I miss this? Oh, here we go. This is it. Okay. So this is Suleiman the Magnificent. Okay. And we'll just read this briefly for you guys. Here we go. Suleiman the Magnificent was the 10th and longest reigning sultan of the Ottoman Empire from 1520 to 1566. He invaded or conquered 15 European states, right? Protestant princes of German states received funds from Suleiman. They took money from Suleiman in their efforts to establish Lutheranism in Germany in 1555. Many historians note that Protestantism would never have succeeded in Europe without the support of the Ottoman Sultan. The Sultan also offered his help to the Lutheran princes from the Netherlands. Daniel Goffman, American professor of history and Ottoman expert, claims that the major factor for the expansion of Lutheranism in Europe was the Ottoman menace, which directly encouraged Protestantism. And in northern Hungary and in Transylvania, where Calvino-Turkism became the dominant religion. It was known as Calvino-Turkism, right? Because it was aligned with Islam. The French Calvinist faction argued that an alliance with the Ottomans must be used to destroy Catholic Spain. The Ottomans knew that by encouraging Protestantism everywhere, they would force the Habsburgs to divide their forces, and thus the Turks and the Protestants of the 16th century probably saved one another. Right? So there's more to be said about that, but let's just say that there's more to be said about that topic. But that's enough for now, Sam. Right, so the myth of Hitler's Pope was started with a play by a former Hitler Youth member written in 1963 called The Deputy. Yes, he helped bring down Constantinople. In fact, the Ottomans aligned with various Protestant groups to attack Catholic positions. They actually attacked strongholds of the Catholics together. They collaborated with the Muslims. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that history. So, yeah. So a former Hitler Youth member wrote a play in 1963 called The Deputy as a piece of propaganda. Vilification began as easily dismissed communist agitprop against the strong. So vilification began as easily dismissed, easily ignored communist agitprop against the strongly anti-communist Pope. But the campaign became a major issue with the Berlin premiere of the play written by Rolf Hochhuth. Hochhuth drew on communist propaganda to write the play The Deputy, and he accused the Pope of silence and inaction in helping Jews. So this started the decline in Pius's reputation. Remember, while we're at this, don't forget, there was a very common cry by the Dutch and others, right? They would say, rather Muslim, let's just simplify it, rather Muslim than Catholic, rather Ottoman than Papist. Basically, but it boils down to rather Muslim than Catholic. And in fact, they would state, the Protestants would state that they have more in common with the Ottomans than they do with the Catholics, and therefore they should ally together. Right? So basically, this decline in Pius's reputation was started by this former Nazi youth member who wrote a play making these false claims. Hochhuth vilified Eugenio Pacelli, who was Pope Pius XII in 1939, that's when he was made Pope, as a Nazi collaborator. So this idea comes from a play. And they mark him as an icy, avaricious, absent pontiff, guilty of moral cowardice and inexcusable silence as Europe's Jews were murdered by the Nazis. And it was promoted as the most controversial play of our time, and The Deputy was fictional, entirely fictional. It's extremely polemical against the Catholic Church, and it offered literally no historical evidence. Even though it claimed to, it actually did claim to. It became a sensation and ignited a firestorm of controversy in the media and among intellectuals. Now, Protestants love communist propaganda. So Cold War communists sought to discredit the Vatican's moral authority with a disinformation campaign called Operation Seat 12, because the Catholic Church had banned and had spoken out against communism. So unearthed in 2007 by a man called Ion Mihai Pacepa, right, Pacepa, who was the leader of the Romanian Secret Service, right, a general in the Romanian Secret Service who defected. The plot involved fabricating a play portraying Pope Pius XII as a Nazi sympathizer. The Ion Mihai Pacepa and another Polish colonel, now a general, posthumously, were the two highest-ranking Soviet bloc members to defect. Right? They both went to the US. And in this case, he is one of the, if not then the second, if not the highest-ranking Soviet Union spy to ever defect. So, authorized by Nikita Khrushchev in 1960, the operation aimed to weaken the Vatican's anti-communist influence. General Ivan Agayants, who was head of the KGB's disinformation department, created the outline and the false research for the play. It was a communist play called The Deputy, while devoted communist and producer Erwin Piscator brought it to life on the stage. Now, posing as priests seeking to re-establish diplomatic relations between Romania and the Vatican, spies infiltrated the Vatican archives. And despite they were there for about 2 years, I believe. So these communist spies infiltrated the Vatican, right? Despite finding no incriminating evidence against Pius, Agayants used the stolen documents to bolster the play's credibility. And Ronald Rechlak revealed, now this is a well-known historian on the topic, revealed that many of those involved in the play's production and promotion had ties to communist or leftist causes. Adding to the intrigue, declassified British intelligence speculates that when they say speculates, they basically say it, that the supposed author, Ralph Hochhuth, the supposed author of The Deputy, might well have been an intellectual agent working for the East Germans or the Soviets. So the writer of the play, the guy who wrote it, was a Soviet spy. Historians Michael F. Feldkamp and Michael Burley support Pacepa's account, asserting that Operation C-12 fits into a larger pattern of communist efforts to discredit the Catholic Church and its leaders. Richlak states that the American producer of C-12's play was also a well-known and rabid communist. A declassified British intelligence memorandum surmises that Hochhuth may have played a knowing role in spreading communist propaganda willingly. Michael Burley also states that Soviet attempts to smear Pius had commenced as soon as the Red Army crossed into Catholic Poland. The Soviets hired a militantly anti-religious propagandist, a man called Mikhail Markovich Scheinman, right? And Hochhuth's play drew heavily upon Scheinman's lies and falsehoods. He was a propagandist, and the play drew upon the propaganda by the Soviet agent. Your thoughts, Sam?
So, guys, understand what the sources all prove, documented. So praise Jesus Christ for his research. If you love this stuff, then you got to pray for this man. Go to his YouTube channel, subscribe, pray for his support him, invite him to your channel. So understand, guys, understand what he just documented. It was a communist smear campaign using the gullibility of Protestants who, in their hatred for the Catholic Church, would eat up the fact that the Pope supported Hitler in order to get the Protestants to slander the Pope and the Catholic Church, so to weaken the effect of the Catholic Church, so they can infiltrate with their communist manifesto. Did I get it right?
Yep. Because the Church was standing against communism, it was supporting the Catholics, the Church in those countries which were defying the communist regimes. You know, they had to undermine the Catholic Church.
And you're telling me that because the Protestants, being gullible, because of their hatred of the Catholic Church, believing anything that would then justify their hatred for the Catholic Church, just bought into it hook, line, and sinker and fell for the trap.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. This is verified. I mean, this is documented. You know, this is documented by numerous people. So this was an entire plan that was being... So Jewish defenders of Pius and Churchill. So Hochhuth's Soldiers is another play this guy wrote. Now, there's the supposed writer of the play, The Deputy, wrote a second play in 1967. He attempted to destroy the reputation of Sir Winston Churchill. Again, he rewrote the history of World War II in a heavily biased but very effective manner, right? Causing deep offense and enduring controversy. So Hochhuth relied on David Irving, who was a convicted Holocaust denier. And that's a very interesting story as well. David Irving, he was also just, you know, he didn't exactly get his facts straight, let's say. For his claim that the British Prime Minister not only deliberately targeted German civilians in area bombing by the RAF, but ordered the assassination of General Sikorski, the exiled Polish leader who died in a plane crash. So they were trying to smear the reputation of Winston Churchill. The play peddled the lie that Churchill was prepared to go to any lengths to appease Stalin, even the elimination of the anti-communist Sikorski. Sir Martin Gilbert is an outspoken Jewish defender of Pius XII, the highly acclaimed official biographer of Winston Churchill. He is widely acknowledged as one of the most distinguished and respected historians and biographers of our time. So Gilbert documents how Pius XII was one of the very first to publicly condemn Nazi atrocities via the Vatican radio and to speak out on behalf of Europe's Jews. And he says he mentions the achievements of the extraordinary Catholics who, under the leadership of Pius XII, rescued Jews at great risk to their own lives and to their church throughout Nazi-occupied Europe.
Wow. Let me hit that. A Jewish author, Martin Gilbert, praises the Pope at putting himself and the Catholic Church at risk for loving Jewish lives enough to save them, knowing that the onslaught against the Catholic Church could be vicious, but he did it anyway. What an example of the Spirit of the Lord Jesus Christ. No wonder Pope Pius XII is honored by the Jews. A great man and servant of Jesus Christ. Praise the Lord for him.
Right. So Pius XII not only provided guidelines and inspiration to Catholic diplomats, and don't forget, this guy is Winston Churchill's official biographer, right? So Pius XII not only provided guidelines and inspiration to Catholic diplomats, clergy, and lay rescuers, but directly engaged in rescue efforts himself. In a major address on Christians and the Holocaust, delivered at Church House in London, Gilbert declared the Pope himself gave his personal order on the eve of the German deportation of Jews from Rome to open the sanctuaries in the Vatican City to all Jews who could get to it.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm sorry, guys. That moved me in my heart. Did you see that? Open the sanctuaries of Vatican City so the Jews can run for safe haven.
They actually opened all church properties so that Jews could seek sanctuary in all church properties. You must see the photos of the Vatican. I mean, you have Jews sleeping on the stairs. You have Jews sleeping. The place was overrun, basically. They had nowhere to put people, but they were just taking everyone they could.
You see?
So,
what a great servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. May the Lord honor that servant.
So look, at least the audience knows that I tend to say what I think. No one has to wonder what I think. I tend to be very blunt. I don't give wishy-washy answers. So, but I do realize, I'm well aware that there is a strong effort, the deliberate effort caused by Martin Luther specifically. I mean, do you know that even the claim that Peter is not the rock? I mean, this whole claim, that actually started with Martin Luther. Martin Luther made that claim. Crazy enough, right? So, and the claim that the Pope was the Antichrist, that comes from Martin Luther. So obviously the whole idea of the paganism of the Catholics and all that, there's a deep desire I see within many Protestants to want to hate Catholics, right? But let's go on. So the picture in the background, that's the Pope, and this is the very first time after the Israeli independence and so on, I believe that an Israeli musical group traveled to Italy. And the first time that they went to Italy, they said, the first thing we want to do is we want to play for the Pope as a sign of respect.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So Robert Van Tesca.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Go on. No, go on, please.
So they wanted to honor the Pope for what he did for the Jews?
Yep. Yeah, this is an Israeli band. Yeah, Israeli group. I'll talk about that.
Catholics, you have nothing to be ashamed of during the Nazi Holocaust. Here are Israeli, you're going to make me cry, brother. Israeli band playing for the Pope. And you're going to make me cry.
Yeah. So Robert Van Tesca, professor, University of Western Ontario, says, Pope Pius XII chose instead to avoid a public confrontation with the Hitler regime, counting instead on less obvious but practical activity on the part of his representatives and Catholic clergy and lay people on the ground. It is entirely legitimate to question the efficacy or wisdom of his approach, but there is very strong evidence to support the view that his public restraint and diplomatic caution saved lives and thwarted some fundamental Nazi objectives. So if he had spoken up, the Nazis would have invaded the Vatican, they would have kidnapped him, they would have killed him. That was their intention. That was their plan. They would have rounded up more churches, they would have rounded up more priests, they would have killed more priests, they would have invaded church property even more. They would have made his work impossible. So he said, look, I've got to keep my mouth shut. We will work quietly in the background. Esteemed British historian Sir Martin Gilbert believes Pius saved hundreds of thousands of lives by whispering rather than shouting. When Pius died in 1958, Golda Meir, former Israeli prime minister, said, when fearful martyrdom came to our people, the voice of the Pope was raised for its victims. The life of our times was enriched by a voice speaking out about great moral truths above the tumult of daily conflict.
Beautiful.
Sam?
I'm just saying, beautiful how brilliant and wise this Pope was. He knew he would do much good saving Jews behind the scenes and publicly condemning Hitler and causing him to murder more Jews and Catholics in the process. Beautiful wisdom from God.
Yeah, I mean, look, so hold on, Soldier of St. Michael. Look, Soldier of St. Michael, at some point, I'm going to be turning my attention to the Orthodox Church, and you're not going to like what I have to say. Let's just say there's a little bit too much Islam in Eastern Orthodoxy for me to be comfortable. You won't be comfortable either. But we'll talk about that another time. Okay, I prefer less Islam in my Christianity than is in the Eastern Orthodox Church. But we'll talk about that another day. And right.
Shot fired. But anyway.
Don't I always fire shots, Sam? Have you seen me not fire shots? When have I not fired shots? Okay, so moving on. So Martin argued that not only did Pius speak out, but the Nazis accused him of being the mouthpiece of the Jewish war criminals. He points to the Pope personally saving 3/4 of Rome's Jews when deportations started after the German occupation. Historian and Rabbi David Dalen notes that Pius's first encyclical was against Nazi racism, and the Allies dropped 88,000 copies of this encyclical over Germany. Right. So now let's have a look at the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. Israel Orchestra plays for Pope Pius XII in historic concert. This is the Israeli National Orchestra, right? Dated here, May 27, 1955. At 10 a.m. today, the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra gave a private concert for Pope Pius XII in the Vatican's consistory hall. Conductor Paul Kletsky had requested that on Israel's orchestra's first tour of Italy, it be allowed to perform for the Pope as a gesture of gratitude for the help which the Roman Catholic Church gave to all persons persecuted by the Nazis and the fascists. The Vatican accepted promptly.
If I can just interject real quickly. Brethren, understand something, just real quickly. You're going to have differences between Catholics and Orthodox. And by the way, he's not Catholic or Orthodox. You're going to have Orthodox.
I'm a Protestant, by the way. I'm Anglican, just so everyone knows. All the respectable people are Anglicans. Yes?
Yeah, exactly. Then you're not supported by the Jesuits. I just want to be clear. You guys know my channel. I'm pro-Orthodox, pro-Catholic. Not because I'm politically correct. It's because I love the Orthodox Catholic churches, and I'm studying their history. And they were one until 1054. Now, understand the nature of how this channel is going to work. You're going to have people who are going to disagree with the Catholic Church, bring criticism against them. Like when I brought David Erhan, and he criticized their own Catholic Church for certain positions, or Jay Dyer. And then you're going to have Catholics do the same. I know sometimes someone's going to say something to offend you, but please, Orthodox Catholics, restrain yourselves. Do not attack one another. You can agree to disagree, and Lloyd will invite you to go to his channel when he brings out his concerns about the Orthodoxy, and you can bring your objections. So I don't want you to think that I'm bashing Catholics or Orthodox. I love the Orthodox Catholic. You know my position, but you're going to have people who are not going to agree complete with Catholics or Orthodox. It's just the nature of things.
Yeah.
It sucks being human.
Yeah, I mean, Soldier of St. Michael says that is a lie from the pit of hell. We fought the scourge of Islam, blah, blah. Sure, whatever. I mean, look, I go where the facts take me. I only speak of what I can provide evidence for. And I'm busy dabbling in a bunch of things, and maybe we'll find something in Eastern Orthodoxy that shouldn't be there, right? Maybe we'll find a little bit of Islam that just maybe we don't want it there anymore. You know, maybe it's not a good thing. So we'll get there. We'll find out. We'll see. Maybe I was wrong about Martin Luther, but it seems I'm right so far. So 4 years ago, when I started speaking about the Sharia, no one believed me. Now everyone assumes that I am 100% correct, right? So by the same token, we'll see where this goes. I think I have evidence that backs up my claims. I bring evidence. I don't just make statements. Yes, I do make strong statements, but I back them up. And don't assume that the Eastern Orthodox Church is perfect, because you may not like what you find. And so far, I'm not happy either. Yeah.
And by the way, that's also with the Catholic Church. Catholic Church is not stainless, in that there have been popes who have done things that have been shameful. For example, when the Pope kissed the Quran, Pope John, when he kissed the Quran. There are Catholics who say that was wrong. So I know, guys, we're going to get offended, but focus now on this topic. Let's get Hitler out of the way and destroy the lie that Pope Pius was Hitler's Pope. Then we can talk about other issues. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, people ask me, are you going to criticize the Catholic Church? Look, man, everyone is criticizing the Catholic Church. Like everyone, his dog, his mother, and his grandmother is lying about or slandering the Catholic Church. Why do I need to add to that noise? The Catholics admit their faults. Okay, Protestants, look, I'm sorry, and I say this as a guy who comes from a family that was deep in the church, has multiple priests, even a bishop in the church, people who studied at King's College in London in theology. So I grew up in the church my whole life. And I will say this bluntly, and I've never been shy to say this, and I've said it often, Protestants lie through their teeth about the Catholic Church constantly. They lie about Martin Luther constantly. And not once off, not accidentally. It is a constant practice. That upsets me, right? And so, yeah.
By the way, if you guys notice why I haven't been as apologetic for the Protestants, let me tell you why. You'll say, well, okay, Sam, you're going back for the Orthodox and the Catholic. Why not Protestants? Let me just tell you. Okay, why? Because sadly, I was the victim of Protestant misinformation. Sadly, as a Baptist and a Calvinist, I was taught every wild conspiracy theory about the Catholic Church, from Alberto Rivera telling me that the Jesuits have sent plans, Islam was created by the Catholic Church, to the Pope being the Antichrist. So right now, because of what I learned from the Protestant movement and this hatred instilled me towards the Catholic Church, I need Protestants to be shocked and rocked out of their comfort zone to see the lies they've been fed, starting with Martin Luther. So this is why. But go ahead, brother.
Yeah, I mean, so look, a lot of things I say, look, I've learned this much, that no matter what I say, I've tried to say things nicely. Someone always gets offended. There's always some twat on the internet who's just a dick anyway, excuse my French, right? And they're going to say something bad. But even if you're nice, people are going to get offended. The truth has a tendency to offend people, right? So now I'm just going to say it and blah, whatever, just deal with it. You know, therapy.
You meant Richard, right? Like Richard Dick Grayson.
Yeah, something like that. So sorry, yeah, we shall yeah, we'll have a little chat about those things one fine day. But yeah, okay, moving on. Archives and Jews versus propaganda. So I thought this was important enough to get out the way first, because this is important, which is why I was blocked for calling. Yeah, I mean, yeah. There's issues. There's issues wherever you look, but the way that they're framed is often false. Okay, and yeah. So, but anyway, Michael Tagliacozzo, Jewish scholar and foremost authority, typo, of the Roundup of Rome's Jews, strongly defends Pius XII. He's the foremost authority on the history of that period of time where the Jews were rounded up in Rome. He documents that Pius was instrumental in saving the lives of close to 5,000 Roman Jews who were sheltered in the Vatican and in various monasteries and convents in Rome. He has nothing but praise for Pius XII based on his first-hand experience and study of primary documents. I know that many criticize Pope Pacelli, he said in a recent interview. I have a folder on my table in Israel entitled Calumnies Against Pius XII, but my judgment cannot but be positive. Pope Pacelli was the only one who intervened to impede the deportation of Jews on October 16, 1943, which is a good question. What were the atheists doing on that day? Atheists, if you could kindly drop me a comment in the chat or in the comments later, I would love to know. What were you guys doing when this evil was happening? Oh, wait, you guys don't believe in evil, so it's just survival of the fittest, right? So, yeah. But if you can let me know what the atheists are doing to deal with this scourge, so just let us know, because atheists don't need no God to be moral. Just drop that in the chat. So, okay, so he impeded the deportation of Jews on October 16, 1943, and he did very much to hide and save thousands of us. The relevant Italian Holocaust archival documents clearly prove, Tagliacozzo says, that Pius XII's protests and actions were decisive in rescuing 80% of Rome's Jews. Richard Breitman, who's the only historian authorized to study classified American espionage files from World War II, noted that secret documents prove the extent to which Hitler distrusted the Holy See because it hid Jews.
Wow. So you have one Jewish scholar, Michael, I can't pronounce his last name, Tagliacozo. And then you have Richard Brightman admitting the popes were influential, instrumental in saving the lives of Jews, so that about 80% of Rome's Jews were saved from slaughter by Pope Pius XII's Protestant actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he hid them in monasteries, and they were, in fact, they were issuing false passports. They were issuing forged. The Jesuits, now those nasty Jesuits. I seriously, I hope there's not one hiding under my table, but the Jesuits were actually forging passports, birth certificates, ID documents for the Jews. They were creating forged documents to prove they were not Jews.
And in fact, let me show you the biblical basis for what he just said. Now, brethren, let's focus. Let's listen. In the scriptures, you'll find the case of Rahab. She's mentioned in Hebrews 11:31 and James chapter 2, verse 25, what she did in Joshua chapter 2. And you'll find the Hebrew midwives at the time of Pharaoh when Moses was born. You'll find these examples of women who lied to save the murder of innocent lives. Rahab lied when the two spies, Israelite spies, were sent to scout the land. She gave them safe lodging. She lied about their whereabouts to preserve their lives. The Hebrew midwives lied to Pharaoh about why they were not killing the male sons of the Hebrew women. And it says, because they lied to save lives, innocent lives from being killed, God blessed them and honored them. This is what you're seeing the Jesuits do. They're following the principle, though lying is bad, but if you're lying to save lives, the murder of innocent lives, then your intention in saving lives is what God will bless and honor. So the Jesuits were following biblical principles here.
All right. So, yeah, well, okay. So this is Mark Riebling, Church of Spies, the Pope's Secret War Against Hitler. Now, what is interesting that the Vatican opened its archives only in the late 1990s. So this information is only coming out now, right? So therefore, people can now actually start to look at the history and verify that, yes, this was actually good history. The Pope was not Hitler's Pope, right? So Church of World War II heroes. So let's have a look. The Church of Spies in 2016 details the Catholic Church's role in World War II. Often accused of collusion with Germany and being complicit in the Holocaust, Riebling argues that the Church was merely pretending to be supportive of Germany to avoid being the target of Hitler's aggression. Pope Pius XII secretly organized an espionage operation with the Allies against the Nazis. He secretly tape-recorded his meetings with top Nazis. When he learned of the Holocaust, Pius played his cards very close to his chest. He sent birthday cards to Hitler while plotting to overthrow him. Okay, this, I don't know if this is true. This is a claim that I've seen. I cannot verify this one. Okay, gun-toting Jesuits stole blueprints to Hitler's homes. I cannot verify this is true. Okay, the claim has been made, but yeah, I mean, so I need to look into that. So don't take that one at face value yet. And a Catholic book publisher flew a sports plane over the Alps with secrets taken from the head of Hitler's bodyguard. The keeper of the Vatican crypt ran a spy ring that betrayed German war plans and wounded Hitler in a briefcase bombing. Right? And also, don't forget, the Jesuits created a secret code that the Nazis could not crack. The Nazis did crack it once, but that was because the Jesuits deliberately made it weak enough for the Nazis to crack, because they wanted them to crack it because it was a false message. Right? So I believe that's the story, right? Kirkus Reviews characterized Church of Spies as a dramatic disclosure of the Vatican's covert actions. Now, they were trying not to get killed, so therefore maybe they weren't flapping their gums all the time, right? Pius' secret war muted his public response to Nazi crimes, fearing that overt protest would impede his covert actions, and he never spoke the fiery words that he wanted. Because it was safer to just keep his mouth shut. Right. Cornwell or corn-fed. I'll go in like another 10 minutes or so without going too long on this one, but I want to sort of get this Hitler's Pope idea out the way. This is called Hitler's Pope, The Secret History of Pope Pius XII by John Cornwell. Is his name Cornwell or corn-fed? Because is he a cow or is he Cornwell? Right? Now, this picture, This is on the British or the American. I'm not sure if this is the American or British. I believe this is the American. Oh, yeah, this is the American version of this photo. The British photo is different. It's wider. In the American version, they cropped this photo. This is supposedly Pope Pius XII leaving Hitler after visiting with Hitler, having a nice social with Hitler. Okay, that's the whole claim. The odd thing is that this photograph was taken long before. The photograph is a deliberate deception. You'll notice, have a look at these pictures. Do these look like Nazi uniforms? Because no, they are not. Right, let's continue. Accused of making unsubstantiated claims and ignoring positive evidence, the author of the book Hitler's Pope moderated some of his allegations since publication of the book. So he had to walk back some of his claims because many historians were accusing him of making false claims. And he's been accused of deliberately falsifying, using this photo to falsify a particular image. Although he has walked back his statements, in other statements, the guy repeated the same trash again. But in 2004, Cornwell stated that Pius XII had so little scope of action that it is impossible to judge the motives for his silence during the war, while Rome was under the heel of Mussolini and later occupied by Germany. So maybe if you don't want to get your face punched in by the Nazis and by Mussolini, maybe you just keep your mouth shut, right? So he admits that the Pope had to be silent because there wasn't much he could do. Now, I had stated to someone that the Pope didn't have an army, and someone said, what about the Jesuits? Oh my God, if the Pope had simply unleashed the Jesuits by saying, unleash the Kraken, the Jesuits would have stormed out of the Vatican and just mowed down the German army. Done. World War II over in 15 minutes. Now look, that is a special breed of stupid, but fine. Moving on. In 2008, he stated that Pius XII's scope for action was severely limited. So direct action was off the table. When Pius XII died in 1958, there were tributes from virtually every Jewish group around the world. It is alleged that Cornwell manipulated the photograph on the front cover of the American edition of the book and incorrectly dated the photo to March 1939, the month that Pacelli was made Pope. Okay, so you see that's the photo of the book here, that it was deliberately edited and altered. Okay? Richlak charged that this had been done deliberately to give the impression that Pius had just visited Hitler, when in fact the photo had been taken in 1927 as Pius was leaving a reception held for German President Paul von Hindenburg at his birthday party.
Wow. So much falsehood propaganda, man. Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Can I just real quickly,
Sure.
I want you to see, when Pope Pius XII died in 1958, did you hear? There were tributes from virtually every Jewish group around the world praising this man for being used. Now, obviously, they don't believe Jesus Christ used him, but our Lord Jesus used him to save the Jews. And you see the book's name is Pope, Hitler's Pope. This is why this book was written, I assume. The Myth of Hitler's Pope, to combat the misinformation by Cornwell. But you're saying that Cornwell basically comes out later and comes on and says, well, he was severely limited in what he could do, huh?
Yeah, so Cornwell's been all over the map. So on the one hand, he's like, yeah, actually, well, maybe I was not, he's talking nonsense. And on the other hand, he starts repeating the same stuff. So Cornwell, on the one hand, wants to repeat the same stuff. On the other hand, he says, yeah, well, actually, maybe I wasn't so, correct. So yeah, bit of a fool, obviously. Yeah. So also Robert Royal also repeats the same allegation of the photograph of him trying to manipulate the photo. Okay, so I'll go a few more minutes. So the most famous, so Luther, Marcion, and the Protestants. So now let's go back to the whole story of the Nazis. Where did the ideas come from? What ideas where did this guy get all these crazy notions? So the most famous of the liberal Protestant scholars in Germany and the 20th century was Adolf Harnack, who lived until 1930. And in his book, What is Christianity, printed in 1900, he portrayed Jesus as a historical figure who taught ethical principles and emphasized the importance of love and compassion. So Jesus was just a moral teacher. This is the most influential Protestant minister of the era. Basically saying Jesus was just a nice guy with some nice ideas, So he rejected the supernatural aspects of Jesus' life, such as miracles and his divinity, and he focused on his moral teachings. He taught that Jesus was a human being deeply influenced by the Jewish prophets and saw himself as a reformer of Judaism. His portrayal of Jesus was criticized as a departure from traditional Christian beliefs, but his ideas had a significant influence on the development of liberal theology in the 20th century. Right? So he advocated removing the Old Testament before anyone had heard of National Socialism or National Communism. At the end of the First World War, he attempted to resuscitate the 2nd century heretic Marcion, who had taught that the God of love in the New Testament was not related to the imperfect God of the Old Testament, that there were two different gods, and that Christianity and Judaism had to be totally separated. As Jewish carnal law, as he called it, Harnack maintained that the Old Testament as a unity lies below the level of Christianity, right? So the New Testament is of a lower status, right? And regarding Luther not removing the Old Testament from Protestantism, what an unburdening of Christianity and its doctrine it would have been if Luther had taken this step. So Harnack is telling us, this great German theologian is telling us that Luther had wanted to remove the Old Testament from the Bible. But nonetheless, the latter's emphasis on gospel over law meant that Luther's concept of faith is actually the one that stands nearest to the Marcionite concept. Sam, your thoughts on that last?
Did you guys understand the implication of what was just said? Now, if you're seeing why I'm shaking my head, Harnack, I know of him due to liberal critical scholars that have used his theories to destroy the historicity, inspiration of the Bible. So Harnack, sadly, has a pernicious, wicked influence on biblical scholarship. So when he said Adolf Harnack, I go, oh no, not him again. I had to contend with him in the beginning stages of my apologetics because liberal Protestants would cite him and then the Muslims would cite them citing him. But did you catch what he said about Luther? For those of you who don't know, if you give me a few minutes, Lloyd, I know you want to wrap it up. I just want them to understand. Marcion, 2nd century, wealthy, quote unquote, Christian businessman, supposedly. He thought that the God of the Old Testament could not be the God revealed in Jesus Christ because the God of the Old Testament was too wicked, cruel, because he had an overemphasis on justice. Whereas Jesus spoke about love and compassion, mercy. So then being influenced by also Gnostic views that were starting to spread, he taught that the God of the Old Testament was a lesser, cruel God, and Jesus came to save us and liberate us from the God of the Old Testament. So then Marcion took Luke's gospel, removed the birth narratives, took Paul's letters, edited them to try to erase any connection with the God of the Old Testament, to deceive Christians into thinking the God revealed in Jesus opposes the God of the Old Testament. And so you have forms of Marcionism that have been spreading till this day. So here it says, Luther's view of faith actually exemplifies the attitude of Marcion in that Old Testament law is pretty much cruel. So you need the gospel of grace, which is faith alone. No law, no works of the law. You don't need the law to be justified. It's just simply faith in Christ. So here it's saying that's a form of Marcionism that really downplays the law, showing that it is pretty much inferior. It's pretty much imperfect. It's pretty much wicked. All you need is the gospel of free grace, believing in Jesus Christ. Now, we have a modern Marcionite. Today, there is a famous preacher, a pastor, Andy Stanley, the son of the late Charles Stanley. He's a Protestant minister, a minister of the megachurch. Go listen to his sermons. He is a neo-Marcionite. He really downplays, dehistoricizes, and degrades the Old Testament and overemphasizes just looking to Jesus. And he's even willing to deny the historicity of the Old Testament in order to put as much, to erase as much obstacles to people coming to Christ as possible. So Andy Stanley today is what we'd call a neo-Marcionite. Oh, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, no, so he's saying that Luther's ideas, Luther's theology stands very close to Marcion. And in fact, I mean, I'm not going to do it now, but in the future, we can talk about that. And you can see, because Luther also, remember, Luther wanted to remove the book of James, the book of Jude, the book of Hebrews, and the book of Revelation. He called them all basically useless trash, right? Now, I mean, I know you can find online lots of stories of whatever. I don't care. I have no interest in what other people have to say. I am really just interested in trying to weave my way through that mess and trying to make sense of it. So Luther wanted these books gone because the book of James literally contradicted Luther's theology, and he wanted it gone because it contradicted his theology. Luther made edits to the Bible. Luther rearranged the Bible. Luther wanted to move some books because he couldn't throw them out. He wanted to move them to the back of the Bible. He did selective use of these things, right? He would have caused a firestorm if he had literally just tossed books out of the Bible. But let's just say Luther was doing a few things. I mean, if I must show you what I have so far on Luther and what a low opinion Luther had of James, of the Gospel of Jude, of Hebrews, of Revelation, he had a very, very low opinion. So, Sam, this bullshit about sola scriptura, we only follow the Bible, the Bible alone. Oh my God, the Bible! That trash. Okay, Luther had utter disrespect for a lot of the Bible. He thought it was crap and he wanted it gone. So please, you are lying to me when you say the Bible alone. I only listen to the Bible. Luther liked the Bible after he got rid of the stuff in the Bible he didn't like.
100% on the money. Did you hear what he said? 100% on money. It's not sola scriptura, it's sola Luthera, because Luther's sola scriptura was based on his reduction of the canon. When the Deuterocanonicals were being used to refute him, he said they're not inspired. They don't have canonical status. We don't need to appeal to them for doctrine. So the Protestant rejection of the Deuterocanonicals is because of Martin Luther. And the fact that Martin Luther relegated James because he couldn't get rid of it shows you that Martin Luther was not committed to sola scriptura. He was committed to what he believed should be the list of scriptures that should be authoritative, and what he relegated to a secondary status, books that should not be brought into the discussion of determining justification. So Martin Luther did not believe in the Bible. He believed in his interpretation of what the Bible is and what the Bible means, just like many Protestants like Jamal Muhammad Dwight, Anthony Dodgers. Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, Luther had a very low opinion of a lot of the Bible. And I mean, Luther had utter disrespect for the Bible. His words are shocking to read. So this idea of sola scriptura is a lie. And in fact, Martin Luther's own words, and this is provable. I believe it can be proven. Now, I'm not saying that proof is persuasion. That's a different story. But it can be proven from Martin Luther's own words that he was well aware that sola fide, right, was false doctrine. He knew that he was contradicting the Bible, and he knew this because he knew that James contradicted him. And I can show this from Martin Luther's own words. Now, I know Protestants will twist the meaning of James 2:24 in any which way that they want to, but this is very, very clear from Luther's own words that he knew for a fact that he was contradicting the Bible and contradicting the book of James. His own words prove the lie. So,
absolutely. Guys, I hope you keep that in mind. And by the way, you have my permission. Take this video, upload it, clip it, make it go viral. Go to his YouTube channel. We've linked it in the description box. We pinned it. Subscribe to the channel. Watch his stuff, even when you disagree with him. He's not trying to be politically correct, but he's not trying to be offensive towards the ancient churches. And yes, I can see he has the same passion I have, because as Protestants, when we realize the lies that we've been fed by Protestantism, we do tend to be a little more harsh with Protestants. Protestants understand why. Understand. When for 20 years of my Christian life, I was taught Protestant propaganda against Orthodox and Catholic that turn out to be lies from the pit of hell, I am salty. I am upset. I'm offended that I bought into this. So if I come out a little more harsh against Protestants, understand why. I was one of you, and to be duped for so long, I'm upset. I'm angry.
Yeah, I am. I'm upset. And so there's lots to be said about that. There's a lot to be said. But also people will say, well, Martin Luther felt that reason needed to be needed to be secondary to faith, because faith was important. Faith had to lead reason. Trash. Utter trash. Martin Luther hated reason. Reason was the enemy of God. Logic, rationality was the enemy of Martin Luther and the enemy of God. And when you apply rationality to Martin Luther's theology, it turns out to be complete trash. And this is why he didn't want people to think. And in fact, its alignment with the Sharia is frightening. So, but we'll discuss that another time. I will be unpacking that in the future.
You read my mind. I was going to ask you, who is Alfred Rosenberg? Because it sounds like a Jewish name. You read my mind. So who is he?
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So, I mean, so there are 93 slides in this presentation. We're 1/3 of the way. And it will get more detailed as we go, but I'm obviously setting the stage, introducing pieces, but we'll be talking, and the details, it'll get thicker in detail as we go. So Nazi ideologist Alfred Rosenberg is overlooked amongst the leaders in the Third Reich. Born to German mercantile parents in the Baltic region of the Russian Empire, he was a student in Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution and deeply influenced by the anti-Semitic forgery, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Just so you know, if you come on my channel and start talking about this book as being authentic, I will just ban you. I'm not even going to have a discussion with you, right? So this was propaganda distributed by the Tsar's secret police. He took it to Germany, where he introduced it to Adolf Hitler. Rosenberg leaned heavily on heterodox, that's non-orthodox writings, that challenged Christianity. He revived interest in a variety of philosophies and individuals long forgotten, such as the cosmic dualist or Gnostic Cathars, and the mystic Master Eckhart von Hochheim. Right, Meister Eckhart. Rosenberg viewed history from a perspective called scientific racism, where the history of humankind had been marked by a struggle, a jihad, between the Aryan race and their supposed genetic inferiors. Race was the newest subject for the application of cosmic dualism, which was a Gnostic dialectic. And of course, where did they get scientific racism from? A guy called...
Is it Darwin?
Darwin. Yes, thank you, Sam. Darwin. They got that from... We'll be talking about Darwin in the future. Darwin was a sick man with blood in his hands. So he identified the Nazis' task as creating a bulwark against Semitic or Jewish influences from Europe generally and Germany in particular by any means necessary. So the Cathar heresy was a religious movement that emerged in the 12th century in Languedoc, France. The Cathars believed in a dualistic worldview, the Gnostics, which held that there were two opposing forces, a good spiritual force, which is God, and a bad material force, Satan. They rejected the authority of the Catholic Church. They rejected the sacraments, the Eucharist, baptism, and confession. Does that sound similar to a guy called Luther? Some overlap there?
You Jesuits, man, you really are rewriting history.
So the Cathars also rejected the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus, considering him to be a purely spiritual being. They believed in reincarnation and rejected the idea of physical resurrection, and the Cathar movement was suppressed by the Catholic Church in the 13th century through a brutal military campaign known as the Albigensian Crusade. We'll talk about that another time. So Rosenberg and Meister Eckhart, the heretic. Yeah, well, so exactly. That's exactly what happened. Kyrie eleison. That's exactly the case. He was... Martin Luther trash talks the Bible. He does. This idea of the Bible is holy and sola scriptura. No, the Bible is crap unless he thinks the book is good. It's that simple. Yeah. No, it's annoying, Eric. It annoys the living daylights out of me. Look, again, I come at this out of the security profession, national security, not as a religious person. Understand? I'm a Christian. It doesn't mean I'm an evangelist or a trained theologian, right? So Rosenberg figured in a long anti-Jewish tradition in Germany. He was a tortured legacy that began with Martin Luther and continued through many of the prominent German figures of the 19th century. His anti-Christian, the myth of the 20th century, was his magnum opus. So Meister Eckhart is a Christian theologian who writes an Rosenberg, sorry, not Meister Eckhart, Rosenberg. So Rosenberg, sorry, he wrote a book called The Myth of the 20th Century. This was his magnum opus, right? So Meister Eckhart was accused of heresy and brought up before the local Franciscan-led Inquisition, tried as a heretic by Pope John XII, 22nd, but seems to have died before the verdict was received. Now, many Catholics will say, well, Meister Eckhart was a good Catholic and died in the bosom of the church as a good... Yeah, because he died before he could be declared a heretic, but everything he did was declared heresy, right? So that makes him a great Catholic. It's just like, okay, fine. So the Neoplatonism of Pseudo-Dionysius, the Areopagite, asserted a great influence on him as reflected in his notions on the Gottheit beyond the God beyond the God, the monad beyond the visible God, right? So you have the demiurge and the monad. So this is not Catholic, this is not Christian by any means, this is purely Gnostic, right? Philosopher Karl Albert had argued that Eckhart should be placed in the tradition of philosophical mysticism of Parmenides, Plato, Plotinus. Plotinus's student, Porphyry. Now, Plotinus was a pagan of the 2nd century. He started Neoplatonism. Porphyry was his student who hated Christianity. Plotinus is probably the original model for Muhammad, I've discussed that previously. Plotinus is probably the original model, not the only model, but the original model for Muhammad. If you look at the writings of Porphyry about Plotinus, they match Muhammad. But also, if you look at the god called the One that Plotinus created, it is identical, except for one detail. It is otherwise identical to Allah. So Plotinus in the 2nd century creates this model of the monad, the Gnostic monad, that is identical to the Allah of the Muslims. Proclus and other Neoplatonic thinkers. Now, here's the thing, right? So Schopenhauer stated Buddha, Eckhart, and I all teach essentially the same. So how is Eckhart, if Schopenhauer, who hated Christianity as an atheist, right, I believe, and Buddha and Eckhart, they all teach the same, then this guy is by no means a Christian, by no means a Catholic. So accordingly, the so-called Old Testament must be abolished once and for all, is what Rosenberg says. We must abolish the Old Testament as a book of religion, okay? By this, the unsuccessful attempts of the last 1,500 years to make us spiritually into Jews will be eliminated. This is Hitler's right-hand man, his chief propagandist, who's saying, we need to get rid of this Bible, we need to stop being turned into Jews. I don't think Hitler must have not known that this guy was saying these things. This is an attempt for which we, among other things, had to thank our terrible materialistic Jewish rulers. The movement is to be strengthened by the removal of open, distorted, and superstitious reports from the New Testament. So we need to remove the superstition from the New Testament. We need to edit and change and alter the New Testament. All the superstitious nonsense has to go. The necessary 5th gospel cannot naturally be added by a synod. It'll be the creation of a man who experiences the longing for purification very deeply. We're going to make a new gospel. He probably will have studied the theology of the New Testament. And of course, they wrote a new gospel with the aid of Protestant theologians from Germany. Our Pauline churches are therefore, in essential, not Christian. So, they are the product of the Jewish Syrian, Syrian. Oh my God, Sam, what did your ancestors do? So they are the product of the Jewish Syrian leanings of the apostles. These ideas were introduced by the Jerusalem author of the Matthew Gospel. Later, Paul completed the subversion of Christianity independently of Mark. I think this is clear evidence they were Christians. They were Catholics, Sam. This says it all.
Wow.
Yeah.
You understand, again, the assault against Paul. This comes from the view. Many of you see, I'm familiar with this in the 90s because Muslims quoted the scholarship. Let me explain. We don't want to belabor the point, but I want you to explain what you're listening. Please listen carefully. Rewatch this, upload this, go to his channel, subscribe. Among these liberal scholars, there was a view that there were two kinds of Christianity. Jewish Syrian Christianity. Jewish Christianity is represented by James, Jacob, as reflected in the Gospel of Matthew or the book of James. Pauline Christianity, which was the version of Christianity that Paul spread, and then Pauline Christianity spread much wider, had greater influence because it influenced Gentiles, and then it swallowed up Jewish Christianity. So what these scholars are telling you is, we want to go back to the Jewish roots of the faith, Jewish Christianity, the Christianity taught in Jerusalem and Syria, and we want to reject Pauline Christianity because that's a corruption. That's why when you hear Muslims or liberals say Pauline Christianity, they're echoing this outdated scholarship that's a lie from the pit of hell. But go ahead, brother.
Yeah. I will do 2 more slides. All right, do 2 more slides, then we'll call it a night. That's like we're a bit more than 1/3 of the way through. The pace is actually good today. All right. So he says there is no proof that the often made claim that Jesus was a Jew. There is no proof that Jesus was a Jew. In fact, there is much to show the contrary. Jesus possibly was Aryan, or partially so. Like Houston Chamberlain, Rosenberg insisted there was not one shred of historical evidence that Jesus was Jewish, or that his true message had come down to us today. We do not have the true message of Jesus. There are bits and pieces spread throughout the New Testament that suggest Jesus was a Nordic figure. He was from Iran, but he was from Norway. But he was from India. Okay. And he was capable of forming types whose true message can, in the large, be discovered and thus related to classic German values. All else is the magical production of the same Jewish, Middle Eastern, Babylonian theology that subverted Rome and controlled the Hebrew masses. Such was the Pauline falsification of the great figure of Christ. Man, this sounds like Seventh-day Adventism.
It sounds like Islam that says Paul corrupted Christianity, but it has nothing to do with Islam. It has everything to do with the Jesuits, you Jesuit spy.
Yeah, yeah. No, the thing is, they knew this was entirely mythical. With the weird part is that they seem to have known that this was myth, but they liked it so much they went with it, right? Genocide and Mein Kampf as scripture. Rosenberg sympathized and identified with Talat Pasha and the Committee of Union and Progress that executed the Armenian genocide, claiming that there was a deliberate Jewish policy which had always protected the Armenians, and that during the World War, so the Armenians deserved it, okay? And during the World War, the Armenians have led the espionage against the Turks, similar to the Jews against Germany, so they had it coming. Rosenberg backed the neo-pagan German faith movement, which rejected the Judeo-Christian conception of God. Rosenberg then drafted a plan for the future religion of Germany, which would see a positive Christian Reich influenced by Germanic paganism. And he would conduct the expulsion of the foreign Christian religions, meaning Protestantism and Catholicism, right? And the replacement of the Bible as the supreme religious authority with Mein Kampf as the holy scripture of positive Christianity. Please do me a favor. After this talk, go online and read 5 minutes of Mein Kampf. Pick any page. I don't care. Just grab any random page and start reading Mein Kampf. And tell me if you think that would make a great replacement for the Bible. Gee whiz, any random page in that book. And the replacement of the Christian cross with the swastika as the universal symbol of European Christianity in Nazified Christian churches.
So you just proved to me Hitler is a Christian working with the Jesuits who was trying to spread Catholicism all over the world. So thank you for proving your point that he was Christian.
Yes. Yeah, I am shocked. I am shocked. So, for instance, this is just an example of the kind of propaganda that were being taught to German soldiers. So German military chaplains in World War II and the dilemmas of legitimacy, because they actually were legitimate chaplains. So you're just a pastor, one patient. So German chaplain Hans Leonhard describes a visit to a military hospital during World War II. And he gets into a room of men with sexually transmitted diseases. So you're just a pastor, one patient jeered at him. We don't need one of them. You just want to tell us those stories about cattle breeders and pimps. The phrase came from the Nazi ideologue Alfred Rosenberg in his book, The Myth of the 20th Century, where he dubbed the Old Testament a collection of stories of pimps and cattle traders. That's definitely Catholic. Holy moly. Members of the pro-Nazi German Christian movement popularized Rosenberg's phrase in church circles. So tell me just one such story, he said to the man. If you can tell me even one, I will leave the room immediately and never bother you again. All the patients looked at their comrades and he said, I can't think of any right now. And he finally said, the others laughed, but he did not give up. You probably want to tell us something about praying. Well, a real man doesn't pray. So this sounds like a very strong Christian conversation, right? Hitler was really trying to inculcate Christianity into his soldiers.
So you guys see that Alfred Rosenberg was pretty much a Marcionite in the sense that the Old Testament, what did he call it? You see the cattle breeders and pimps. The Old Testament's all about cattle breeders and pimps. And obviously he hated even the New Testament because of Pauline Christianity. And so he wanted Jesus to be a Nordic mythological deity, an Aryan. And yet Hitler was a good Catholic who tried to spread the Catholic Church and its teaching all over the world.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, you know what? I'll stop here. This is like 1/3 done. So we'll probably have to do 3 episodes.
That's
I mean,
true.
one day I'd actually like to do a talk on the history of Paul, which I've mentioned to you before,
Yes.
on where the story of Paul comes from. It dates back. It's hysterically funny. The things Muslim scholars have said about Paul is hysterically funny. I mean, it's a comedy. And I mean, why would they believe what they believe about Paul today when you can show the other 99% that they hide? The other facts are just ridiculously stupid. I mean, objectively stupid. So, but I'll leave this at that. Sam, so I'll call it here for the night.
Lord willing, next Wednesday, if God wills, if you pray for my travels, and I'll be doing a stream a little later, guys. Refuting Sabil Ahmed. We went super in depth, so stick around for that in a few hours. Lord willing, next Wednesday, God willing, he'll announce it. I'll be on his channel doing part 2 of the Didache. Go watch part 1 on his channel. It was a blessing for me to be on with him to talk about Didache. And then, Lord willing, next Thursday, again with prayers, if God wills, because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Next Thursday, God willing, part 2 on was Hitler a Christian? And the links to his YouTube channel, I pinned them in its description box. Go to his YouTube channel. Subscribe, support him prayerfully, financially, use his stuff. Even if you disagree. Oh, see, we got this demon again. 1 second, guys. Can you block me? Yeah, see, that's I just figured out. I forgot to edit this. 1 second. This is Mahmoud Khan. His wife got molested by the Shia. He got sodomized by his uncle. So 1 second. 1 second. No, he did actually. And he's upset about it. So I have to do this right here. Subscribers. See, this is what we're going to do, Mahmoud Khan. I'm going to muzzle you like your uncle muzzled you. And there you go. Voila. Mahmoud Khan. I know you're upset that no one protected you from your uncle doing what Muslims do to young boys in the name of Allah and his dog Muhammad. I know you're upset that you like to beat children and you're a pedophile like Muhammad and your wife was a Shia prostitute. But that's not my fault, man. I'm helping you destroy Muhammad. He's a dog in hell under the feet of Jesus. Now, for the rest of you, God willing, next Thursday, we'll do part 2 on Hitler. Go to his channel. Subscribe, support, even if you disagree with him, take the facts, struggle, wrestle with them, and come to your conclusions. But brother, any final words on your part?
No, what did you take away from this, Sam? Did we conclusively prove that Hitler was a Christian?
What you did was you helped a lot of people to see, number one, not only was he not a Christian, but you also helped people see that the Pope Pius XII, was a godsend. He truly exemplified the spirit of Jesus Christ. He truly showed he loved Jesus Christ because he did all he could to save hundreds of thousands of Jewish lives for the glory of Christ, where you even have Jews praising him after his death. And you have this rabbi who wrote a book praising what Pope Pius XII did. And even in one of your statements, it is said that he was able, by his influence, to save 80% of the Roman Jews living in Rome. So take this information, brethren. Stop the slander and lies against the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope, because he was no friend of Hitler.
Yeah. And by the way, thank you, everyone. I've just gone over 10,000 subs. So yeah, finally. So thank you, Sam. You helped me a great deal getting there. So guys, there's no evidence that Hitler was a Christian. He was maybe up until the age of 16, but we will be talking about that. Many of the topics I've touched on, we will go into more depth in the next 2/3 of this series. There's a lot more to be said, but obviously I want to just sort of, put down the pieces, lay down the basic information. The Pope stuff, that's out of the way now, so now I can get into the rest. But obviously, replacing the Bible with Mein Kampf and making Hitler, in fact, and then Hitler becomes the new Messiah. Hitler becomes the new Jesus. I mean, how is that Christian? That is insanity. So, and they create their own Christian religion by stripping the Bible apart and they literally made a new version of the New Testament.
Yeah, that's it. So, brethren, I hope you enjoyed it. You have my permission, upload it, translate it, clip it, go to his channel, subscribe, learn from his stuff, support him. Lord willing, we'll be back Wednesday on his channel, part 2 on the Didache. Lord willing, next Thursday on my channel, part 2 on Was Hitler a Christian? But pray for us, because though we plan, we don't know what's going to happen. And I'll see you guys, God willing, in several hours. In a few hours, Marcelin, come back. We're going to do something on Sabil Ahmed. So, brother, that's it on my part.
God bless, guys. Thank you.
Lord
and
bless
please
you.
Use this information.
Risen indeed. See you in a few hours, God willing. Take care.